The land out here doesn't forgive anything. 5,000 acres of Nevada nothing, the kind of flat, scorched ground that has killed every man who ever tried to make it pay. I bought it for less than the price of a decent car. People thought I was a fool. They didn't know what was buried under it. They didn't know what was buried under me either. My name is Michael Tremayne. For 11 years, it wasn't. For 11 years, I was Michael Trent, and Michael Trent was a drunk and a ghost and a man with nothing. This is the story of how a family buried me, how I climbed out of the grave they dug, and how I made sure every one of them was standing in it by the time I was finished. They stole my inheritance. They stole my future. They forgot the one thing that mattered. I don't stay buried. My father built the Tremayne Group out of a single foundry and 40 years of not sleeping. Steel first, then shipping, then real estate, then money that made money on its own. By the time I was a boy, we had a name that opened doors in 3 states. He used to walk me along the plant floor with his hand on the back of my neck, and he'd say, "This is yours one day, and you'll be better at it than me, because you'll have started higher up the hill." He died on a Tuesday in October. His heart. He was 59, and I was 26, and I thought grief was the worst thing that was going to happen to me that year. I was wrong about that, the way you're only ever wrong about something once. My Uncle Victor was my father's younger brother, and he had spent his whole life standing just behind the throne, smiling. He was the executor. Within a week, he had lawyers I'd never met explaining to me, slowly, the way you explain things to a child, that the company my father had promised me was held in structures I didn't understand, that my father's final wishes were unclear, that there would have to be a transition, and that for now it was best if I stepped back. Stepping back became being pushed became being gone. They went after my mother first, because she was the one who would have fought. Eleanor Tremayne was not a Tremayne by blood, and Victor never let a room forget it. The story moved around the right dinner tables that she'd been unfaithful to my father, that I might not even be his son, that grief had made her unstable. None of it was true, and all of it stuck. She lost her friends one phone call at a time. She lost the house. She lost the version of herself that walked into a room expecting to be welcome. I'd like to tell you, I went down fighting. I didn't. I went down drinking. First to sleep, then to function. Then it was just the shape my days took. I drifted to cities where the name meant nothing, slept in a car until there was no car, then in shelters, then in places I won't describe to you. Somewhere in there I stopped being Michael Tremayne. As long as I carried the name, I was findable, and a Tremayne left to rot was exactly the kind of loose end Victor liked to watch. So I put it down. Michael Trent. Nobody. The clan couldn't track a man who no longer existed on paper, and disappearing was the only thing I had left that I could still do well. I met Nellie Rivera in the worst diner in Reno, where I was bussing tables for cash and meals because it was the one kind of work that never asked for a history. She came in 3 nights running and sat in the same booth with a laptop held together by stickers, nursing a single coffee for hours, typing like the machine owed her money. On the 4th night, the manager told me to move her along. I went over to do it, and she looked up, and something crossed her face that I hadn't seen aimed at me in years. Recognition. "You're Michael Tremayne," she said. Not a question. I told her she had the wrong man. She turned the laptop around. On the screen was a photograph of me at 25, in a good suit, at some gala, the heir apparent with a glass in his hand, and no idea what was coming. She'd been sitting there 4 nights, making sure. "Victor Tremayne is my father," she said. "He just made sure nobody ever knew it." Nellie was the daughter Victor made and erased. Her mother, Marisol, was a woman he kept quiet and paid off, and then, when she made the mistake of wanting more than quiet, destroyed. By the time Nellie was 12, her mother had been talked into a hospital she never came back out of, signed in on the word of doctors Victor knew socially. The official story was that Marisol was simply unwell. Maybe she was by then. You can make a person sick by treating them like a secret for long enough. So, Nellie grew up the way I'd ended up, with nothing. Except, where I had a name I'd thrown away, she had never been allowed one at all. She taught herself to code on machines other people had thrown out. She got good, she got dangerous, and the whole time she was building one thing in the back of her mind, patiently, which was a way to make Victor Tremayne pay for both of us. We were the 2 people he'd thrown into the same ditch. It took her 4 nights to find me. It took me 4 minutes to understand I'd been waiting 11 years for someone to walk in and say his name out loud. Nellie used to work for a company called Sentinel Dynamics. If you've never heard of it, that was the point. Sentinel did the work that the companies you have heard of pay other people to do, so their own hands stay clean. They scraped data nobody had agreed to give them. They built predictions about how people would vote and who they'd believe and what would make them afraid. They ran surveillance contracts with no name on the invoice. They lived in the gray country between what's illegal and what's only legal because nobody's looked yet. Nellie looked. She found the fraud first, the ordinary kind, money run through shells into offshore accounts that existed only to make the books say something they shouldn't. Then she found the harvesting, the data they had no right to, and the clients they were quietly selling it to. She kept a careful record of everything she witnessed. Dates, names, the shape of it, the way you do when you already suspect you'll need to prove it one day. She was careful. She wasn't careful enough. They worked out she'd been looking, fired her on a Friday, and on the Monday, two men she'd never met explained to her in a parking garage exactly what would happen to her and to her mother in that hospital if she ever opened her mouth. She kept her record anyway. But the thing she carried out of Sentinel that mattered most wasn't the fraud. It was a land deal nobody on the executive floor had thought about twice. Sentinel quietly owned 5,000 acres of dead Nevada desert, written down as a near-worthless legacy asset. Nellie was the only one who'd actually read the survey. Under that dead ground ran fiber-optic trunk lines, the fat backbone cables that carry the country's data coast to coast, laid through there decades ago because the route was cheap. There was a decommissioned Cold War communications bunker, hardened and climate stable, the kind of structure you could not get permission to build today at any price. And there was room, flat, endless, empty room, sitting on top of the one thing every data company on Earth was starting to starve for, which was somewhere to put the machines. When she showed me the survey, something came back to life in me that I'd assumed had died with everything else. It isn't dead land, I told her. It's an empire nobody has built yet. The trouble was that you don't build an empire on a busboy's wages and a grudge. Then I remembered the one man my family had thrown away who might still be alive and still be angry. Joseph Clifton had been my father's lawyer for 30 years. When Victor took the company, he got rid of Clifton in the first month because Clifton was loyal to my father, and loyalty is the first thing a man like Victor clears out of a building. I found him in a small office above a hardware store, still working, an old man with my father's photograph on the wall behind his desk. When he realized who I was, he had to sit down. Then he got angry, and the anger was at himself. He had been looking for me for 11 years. Victor had told everyone I'd cut off the family. Clifton hadn't believed it, but he'd had no way to reach a man who had deliberately erased himself. He kept searching because of one thing he was holding that he had never been able to deliver. My father, Clifton told me, did not trust his brother. Not at the end. He'd seen something in Victor in his last year that frightened him. So he did the quiet, careful thing that careful men do. He created a blind trust, $10 million, walled off from the company, invisible inside the estate, with instructions that it was to be released only if things ever went wrong for me. One beneficiary, me. Victor never knew it existed. For 11 years, that money had sat in the dark, growing, waiting for a man who had changed his name specifically so his family could never find him, and who had, by the same act, made sure the one good thing his father left behind couldn't find him either. My father had reached out of his grave and handed me exactly what I needed at the exact moment I'd finally found a reason to use it. $10 million is not enough to buy a company like Sentinel Dynamics. I knew that, but the money was never the weapon. It was the knife I'd use after Nellie's evidence had already opened the body. Here is the thing the films get wrong about revenge. It is slow, and it is boring, and it is mostly paperwork. We did it the patient way because the patient way is the only one that holds. Nellie did it by the book, which turned out to be the sharpest weapon she had. She filed as a whistleblower. Everything she'd witnessed at Sentinel went to the regulators as a protected disclosure, the kind the law is built to shield, and she was careful to hand them only the thread, never the whole cloth. She didn't give them anything she'd taken. She told them where to dig, and Sentinel's own records, pulled under subpoena, did the rest. By the time a motivated short seller smelled blood in the water, the case was being built out of the company's own filing cabinets, and not one piece of it could be dismissed as the grudge of a fired employee. Sentinel started to bleed. Investigations cost money, and they frightened clients, and Sentinel's clients were the kind who vanish at the first hint of daylight. The company that had threatened Nellie in a parking garage suddenly had problems of its own, and they were the kind that don't go away. Then we moved, through shell companies that led to other shell companies that led, in the end, to nowhere anyone could follow. We bought Sentinel's distressed debt for cents on the dollar, because by then, no one else wanted it. We bought the Nevada land out from under them, while their executives were still telling each other it was worthless. And when the company finally collapsed under the weight of its own rot, we were the creditor standing first in line at the auction, buying the assets we wanted for a fraction of what they were worth. The board never knew who beat them. Not one of them imagined it was a woman they'd fired and a man they'd never heard of, working out of a rented office, funded by a dead man's foresight. We renamed what we built from the wreckage. We called it Trent Analytics, after the man I'd had to become to survive. The other name, the real one, I was saving for later. Nellie built the machine, and I built the empire around it. What she made out on that dead land was years ahead of anything Sentinel had ever limped along with. Predictive engines that actually worked, social graph mapping that could show you how an idea moved through a population like dye through water, a risk analysis platform that governments and banks came to lean on faster than was probably healthy for any of us. She put it all in the old Cold War bunker, on top of the fiber that was already in the ground. I did the part she had no patience for. I drilled the land and hit water, deep aquifers nobody had thought to test because nobody believed the surface was worth standing on. I ran cattle on the green that came up out of it. I turned 5,000 acres of nothing into a working ranch that fed itself, sheltered the business from tax, and gave the whole operation a second set of legs to stand on. Data, infrastructure, agriculture, land. By the fourth year, it was worth more than the Tremayne group had ever been worth in my father's hands, which meant it was time to go and collect the stolen version too. Victor's Tremayne group had not aged well. He was never the builder my father was. He was the kind of man who inherits a machine and slowly runs it into the ground while telling everyone he designed it. The company was over-leveraged, propped up on debt and reputation, and the reputation was the only thing holding the debt in place. My cousins, Cole and Brett, had spent their 30s spending. None of them had any idea how thin the ice under their own feet had gotten. We bought the ice. Quietly, the way we did everything, we acquired the Tremayne group's debt. We took our positions through entities dressed up to look like a dozen different rivals, so that when the foreclosure notices and the asset seizures and the eviction orders finally landed all at once, Victor did exactly what we knew he would. He assumed it was a competitor. He spent months fighting the wrong enemy in every direction except the one that was actually killing him. When there was nothing left to fight with, the takeover went to a vote, and the new majority owner sent a single representative to the meeting to take control. Me. I walked into the boardroom my father had built, toward the chair my uncle had stolen, 11 years after they put me in the ground. Victor was an old man by then, and when he saw my face, the color went out of it, the way it goes out of a man who has just understood, far too late, exactly what has been happening to him. He said my name like it was an accusation. I told him the only true thing I'd been saving for 11 years. You taught me everything I needed to know, I said. You did it by showing me, in detail, exactly what not to become. Then I did to him that he had done to me, except I did it in one clean afternoon, and to people who had earned it. I removed Victor. I removed my cousins. I cleared out the smiling men who'd helped him bury a family, and I had the name over the door changed back to what it should have been the whole time. Tremayne. Both companies now. Mine. If the story ended there, it would be a smaller story than the one I want to leave behind. I stopped drinking. Not on the day I won, the way it happens in films. It was harder than that, and it came later, and it took help I had spent a decade refusing. But I did it, and I did it standing up, because a man cannot honor his father with one hand while holding a glass in the other. I cleared my mother's name the only way that ever truly works, which is by becoming impossible to whisper about. Eleanor Tremayne walked back into the rooms that had closed against her, and this time nobody got to wonder aloud whether she belonged. She belonged. She always had. It was the rooms that had been wrong. Nellie became what she had earned. Chief Technology Officer, co-owner, my equal in everything but the name on the building, and we put that right too. The first thing she did with real money was get her mother out of the place Victor had buried her in, into care that treated Marisol like a person instead of a secret. I watched Nellie sit with her mother in a garden in the sun, and I understood we had been building toward exactly that the whole time. The empire was only ever the means. People ask me if it was worth it. I tell them the truth. Revenge built the empire, every brick of it. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't apologize for it. But revenge is a fire, and a fire builds nothing on its own. All it does is clear the ground. What keeps the empire standing is the other thing. The name made clean, My mother back in the light, Nellie's mother in the garden, and the proof, written across 5,000 acres of land they all swore was worthless, that you can bury a man and still be the one who ends up in the ground. They forgot the one thing that mattered. I don't stay buried. Welcome to Karma Comes Calling, where every secret has a shelf life. This channel brings you powerful, emotionally charged stories of revenge, betrayal, justice, and truth. Each tale is crafted to pull you in, keep you listening, and leave you thinking long after the final twist. Sit back, listen closely. Because at Karma Comes Calling, every secret has a shelf life. Remember to subscribe to hear more stories.